Hello everyone, welcome to JS Gigs and my name is Deepak. Now in this tutorial we are going to be talking about some of the other important stuff within Cypress. So what we're going to talk about essentially is stub the response and some of the methods defined within the scope of a component. We are also going to be trying these spies, and using the spy we would see how many times a particular function was called. We will also talk about the intercept method, wherein we would be able to intercept a particular URL or the API call, and then we would render or we would give the response that we wish to give. But before all of this, I will just quickly give you a gist or a walkthrough of the behavior that we are going to be testing. So in order to do so, let me just take you to the browser quickly. And here is the application that I have. So let me refresh this. So here comes the username, and that's something which we have already tested. And this is the password, right? And once you key in the username and password, upon click of the login button, you can see that an API call was made, and this particular API basically returns the username and password, the username and the password. And then once it returns the username and password, it also gives 200 or 201. Right, so this is basically a post API. And again, if I take you back to the code editor, I'll quickly also give you a walkthrough of the code basically written in order to do this functionality, right? So here in the login component, you can see that on click login is a function which gets called when you click on the login button. And once you click on the on login button, it checks if you're already logged in. If not, then it is going to be basically making an API call. And once it makes the API call, and that's when you would see the return response written on the console, right? And then this is this is about the behavior. So let me take you here on the login.component.cby.ts. So here in the login.component.cby.ts, you may notice that we have already written a small script, and this entire script was written within just one describe. So let me write down another describe here. And let me write a function, and here the function I'm going to be writing this, and then before this I'm going to be writing login component behavior test. And let me write down this way, and then in the bottom I'll correct the function marking, and I think we're pretty much good. So this finishes the first described method. Let me write down another describe within it. All right, so the second describe method basically going to test the stubs, the spies, and also the intercept. So essentially we are going to be testing the login functionality, and in that login functionality we are now going to be writing the stubs, intercept, and also the spy, right? So let me do it this way, right? Okay, so now let me again take you back to the login component, and here are the login component. If you are familiar with Angular code and something you're trying to test the Angular functionality, you may notice that here is the button that I've written, and on click of that button I'm going to be calling on click login. So here the on click login essentially returns nothing. It's a void based function, and then once it returns nothing, so what it essentially does is that, let's say if your user is already logged in, and that's when it is going to be logged in, then it'll tell you it'll just print it on the console, and also going to be making an auth service call. And this auth service call essentially sends two values, which is the username and a password. And then once it receives the username and password, let me also open the login function. So here at the login function, you may notice that I've imported the HTTP client, and after importing the HTTP client, I was able to make this particular call at line number 21, which states that I'm going to be making a post API call at the address /API/login, and I'm passing in the username and password. The same username and password is something which is being passed to this particular class file or this particular service from the component, as you can see over here, at line number 36. So here's a login form, the username and the password, right? And also note that login component HTML tells you that it gets enabled only when the login form is valid. Until then, it remains invalid or disabled. So when you come here and then type in the username and password, it basically going to be making an API call. And once it receives an API call, and that's when it would do a dashboard, it'll do a redirect URL to dashboard. Since we are doing, since we are only testing the component and not really doing an E2E, so I do not wish to really cover the component level movement of URL. However, I would want to just cover login functionality if that works or not, and then the other related stuff, right? So I think the functionality should be clear to you. Now I'm going to be taking you back to the script file, which is cy.ts login.component.cy.ts, and let me write down test cases to test the login behavior, right? So in order to do so, the first test case I'm going to be writing is, the first statement I'm going to be writing is the intercept. So please understand that all these interceptors are available, all these functions, interceptors, stubs, clock, all these functions are available within the CY object. And this CY object, we will try to see what this CY object is all about and how it is similar to Windows object. But inside the describe function, the CY object precisely is the object which holds all the values and all the objects that you have in your test script. It looks much like a Windows from the design of it, but when we'll try to see that in a short while. So before I go anywhere, let me just write down the first statement, which is also the intercept. So intercept, and then I'm going to be testing the login. And once you come here as login, that's pretty much it. I don't think so I need an alias, and that's something which we had seen in the last tutorial. So let me remove this bit. Please understand that all these suggestions are essentially coming to me from the GitHub Copilot. I personally have a Copilot license, and that's what I use to. So I have now the statement which I have written on line number 54 is going to be intercepting all the post messages, and it'll look if the URL is /API/login, and that's when it would basically return the response. The response which has to be returned is written in the third place here. So it's going to be returning two things: the status and status code and body. The status code is going to be holding 200, which is a success, and in case of a body, it returns a token. And that's something I've defined an alias to be called as login, but I don't think so I need an alias, so I'm just removing this here. Now in the next line, what I'm going to do is, like, I'm just going to be writing the spy logic for on-click login function, right? So what is spy? Before I explain this, let me take you to the documentation of Cypress. So to do so, let me take you to the browser. And here at the browser, you may notice that, let me just click here, Spies, right? So spy is nothing but a method from the Cypress, which basically monitors your object, and a method that you define inside that object just to be monitored. The spies are usually called or used when you really need to see if a particular function inside your object was called or not. So what is the difference between spies and a stub? So stub is essentially tells you, or essentially returns, a particular hard-coded response, and then when you do a stubbing of any of the function that you have, it basically returns a particular response that you usually define inside the return function. So here, all its methods, all the way through which it can be called, are written here in the documentation of Cypress. You can come here and can have a look at it. If I were to talk about the second statement, what it tells is that it replaces the object method with a stub function, as you can see here. Then there are other ways also to call it. Let's say if you want to particularly return a function response if the function was called with a particular argument. So that's how you can basically define it. It's with args, resolve, reject, and resolve and reject is basically for the promises. And I hope you should all be aware about what promises are, right? So now if you come down here, these spies, it tells you, to spy or to just look for if that particular function was called. In case of stub, you also control the you also control the response that it returns, right? So that's a difference. So spy meaning you just look at a particular function and you try to create a details around it. In case if you're using a stub meaning you are mimicking the response of a function, and in which case you are also controlling the response that a particular function must return in order for your test case to run, or a particular if you're trying to test any corner case scenario for your application while doing a Cypress test, right? So this is all about this is the difference between stub and spies. Now again, I'll take you back to the code editor. So here at the code editor, what I'm going to do is like I'm just going to be writing the first spy rather. So this spy is for a particular function. So let me write down the statement first. And I'm going to be looking at login component. And then the function I wish to spy is called on-click login. And I don't think so I need this. I'm just going to be removing this whole suggestion and remove this spelling mistake. And I'm going to be putting this as one-click login, right? And now what I'm going to do is like I'm going to be now I'm going to be stubbing a particular response, right? So if I were to take you back to the login component .ts, you may notice that essentially it is calling an on login. It particularly checks for a value, which is a login form, whether it is a valid or not. And the other value it does is that line number 38, which tells if the auth service logged in is set or not, right? So what I'm going to do is like I'm just going to be creating a particular function. So the function name is going to be this dot is login function, and this particular function is going to be returning a boolean value. So let me come down here. I think we are pretty much good here. Now let me take you back to the CY file. So now I am going to be stubbing the response for is logged in function. So I'm going to be returning, let's say, false. And here I'm going to be returning this dot is logged in is function in the auth service. So here, in case of a component, it basically returns a value which is stored in the auth service. But here, if you look at our component, we are mandatorily returning it false, even though the login is going to be successful, right? So this is the stubbing. So it is just to show you that this stubbing works, and we will also see both the scenarios when we make it let's say false or when we make it. So now here now what I'm going to do is like I'm just going to be writing a few lines of code in that I'm going to be accessing the username and password for a particular for the login form. So let me write down this one. And the next I'm going to be writing the login button test. The login button must have a text called login, and once you do this you need to click on the login function, so or the login button rather. So you click it by through program by the line number 63, and then once you come down I'm just going to be writing the last line. In this case, one click login should have been called once, right? So if you notice here at line number 56 and 64, you notice that in line number 56 I'm spying on a particular function called on click login, and when you do a login button click, as we had also seen in the component, it basically makes a call to the login function. And once you on click login function, and on click login function is the name is given a name which is on click login here. So that's why I have given at the rate on click login, so which tells my Cypress engine to basically look for a particular assertion. In our case, it should have been called, right? So let me save this, and now I am going to be running. Now I am going to be running my Cypress test. So to run this, I'm going to be writing a command here, the command prompt down below the right hand side, which is npx. And while it runs, I'm going to be sharing my entire desktop so that I can show you what it runs and how it behaves. So here, if I click on the component, it then tries to open to the next page. And now if I click on it, and this particular browser tells us the other available, what are the functions available. So let me just come here. Okay, so I'm going to be also going to give you idea on debugging. So let me open this bit over here and then now click on the login script. So once it clicks, so here you can see that there is an uncaught exception. How do you determine, such errors, or how do you really, how should you really debug this? So in order to debug your Cypress test script, there are two ways, right? So first one is, let's say if you are here on a particular script, which is login.component.cy.ts, and that's when you can basically type Control P or Command P in case of Mac. And let's just open this, right? You can simply put a debug point like this. You can put a debug point like this. So there is a mistake particularly that intentionally we have committed, which is we have written all these cy.get and stub and intercept command within the describe. I wanted you to show you how an error on the page would look like. And let's say if you want this execution to stop at this particular point, you can simply put a debug point like the way I have done here and do a refresh. Once it reaches here, it's just going to stay until we clear up, until we want it to run successfully, right? So now you can see that it has come. So let's say if I move next, and here's the error, right? So how do we fix it? So again, I'll take you back to the code editor, and there at the code editor, what I'm going to do is like, I'm just going to be putting all entire stuff inside the it function, because here at the it function, you can write all these statements, right? So do it this way. Right, and then I've pasted it inside the it function, and let me do a refresh here. And let's see what is the new error that we get, right? So to see that, I'll show you the entire desktop of mine. So here, now you see that in the login component.test, it tells me that there's a particular injector or a dependency not found, right? Which is HTTP client. How do we get it inside it? How do we get it client, HTTP client inside the test bed, right? So in order to do so, again, I'll take you back to the code editor. And if you look at the code editor here at the top of a function where we have written the before each, you may notice that we have only imported one particular browser module. So let's say HTTP client doesn't really come from this particular module. In order to have the HTTP client work, you will have to import another module, which is HTTP client module. And once you do so, I think now the HTTP client would be found and the use test case would run successfully. Right, so let me just see if this works. Again, let me show you the entire desktop of mine. So now you see that at least the first it function has passed all its test cases. However, in the second one, there is a problem. What is the problem here? It says that login button is not found. So let's debug this and go to the code editor once again. Now you can see that the login button is not here, right? So let me assign, I'm going to be writing another selector there before each, because that's something which is going to be commonly used across. So how have we selected the login button up until now is through this particular class, which is MDC button label. And then I'm going to be putting this as cy.get, and then I'm going to be assigning a name or alias of this particular login button as @login button. And that's something which we are going to be using further down below in other script. As you can see at the line number 65 and 66, the login button is being used. Let me save this and take you back to the desktop, and there the desktop, now you can see that all the test cases pass successfully here. There's another thing that I want to bring your attention to, which is, let's say if you're debugging a particular application the way we have done, we have either put a breakpoints here, and there was another cool way to basically look for the debug is through the debug function. So how do we see that? So again, I'll take it to the code editor, and let's say if you wish to debug a particular line, right? So in that case, there is a CY or the Cypress object has a method called .debug, and once you write this, what it essentially does is that it prints the CY essentially has another function called debug, and that's something you can place on against any of the statement that you have made between line number 63 and 67, or other any of the get. So I'm going to be doing is like, I'm just going to be putting a debug here. It's fairly simple. right? And once you put a debug here, and then we will see that what it does to your script, right? So in order to do this, I'll share the entire desktop of mine, and then I'll try to run the case again. So once you run the case, it runs it. And also notice that I've essentially given I'm essentially bypassed the debugger. So debug info, and because you had put that in on that particular line, so that's why it has given almost everything that it has, as you can see over here, right? So all the object that it carries and all the other functionality that it has in terms of an object would be printed over here. And just before it going to be debug info, and that's what essentially the debug function does, right? And let's say if you remove a debugger here and do a refresh, so since you have put a debug point in there in the line number 64, it is also going to be stopping the script once it reaches here from the Cypress runner. And there also you can see and look at what really you really need to see in terms of what variables it passes to the different function and how it executes, right? That can be done. So this is the second way of debugging an application. So you can just pass forward and do it, and you can see that things have been printed here successfully, right? So now again I'll take you back to the code editor and remove the debug here from line number 65. Let me save this information here, and now I'm gonna be okay. So far we have covered almost all the important aspect of Cypress testing, which is we have seen what debug is, we have seen what Cypress test script can have multiple describe function, and we have also seen what stubs are, spies are, and clocks are. So if you look at all of these codes, it basically make use of all of these intercept, spy, and stub. And I'm going to be committing this code shortly, and then you'll be able to see that in my GitHub repository. And we have pretty much saved this, right? And then so now what I'm going to do is, like, I'll just take you to the browser, and there I'm going to be comparing the CY and the Windows function because it much Windows function to me. So let me share my entire desktop here. So here on the desktop, what I'm going to do is, like, I'm just going to be doing a refresh, and I want debugger to stop here this particular space. And do a refresh once again. Yep. So now let me see what CY is. Okay, so CY is certainly not a Windows object. It looks like it has so many other functions and objects inside it. Focused, get, next, listen, any, Cypress, and let's see what Windows function has. It is window, localize, zone, top. I think it is slightly different. So the CY is the Cypress function, and yep, I think CY object is associated here at the Windows level. Here you can see that here in this particular place where my mouse is currently. So yeah, they are two different objects, but they look much like Windows to me. Anyways, they both look identical initially, but then I can see very well that these two are different objects, not really same. So let me remove the debug point here, do a run, and there you go. So it has passed all the 7 test cases and none of the test case fails, right? So I'm going to be taking you to the browser, and there in the browser, I'll just quickly give you a walkthrough of what we have covered so far. We have spoken about stubs, spies, clocks. We've also spoken about intercept, stubs, and module intercept and stubs. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about another important aspect, which is screenshots and videos, right? So this is something which comes out of the box from Cypress, and this is also open source. Whenever you really need to run a test case, it also lets you take a screenshot. And how do you take a screenshot? Is fairly simple. You just write down this particular command, which is cy.screenshot, and once you write it down, it saves it, right? You can also define the video, and in that case you would actually really have to do module.export here at the Cypress config and change this video to true. and then you'll be able to do that. But we will come to video a little while later because it makes a lot of sense when we do the end-to-end testing to record the video. However, for this particular case in component, I'm just going to be talking about the Cypress.screenshot, and I'll see that how it works, right? So let me take you to my code editor. So now you can see here at line number 67, I've given a command to take a screenshot. So let me run it, and before I run it, let me take you to the desktop and do refresh. All these information were filled properly, and now I'm going to be taking you to my ID, and there you see that the screenshot. There are a few, or otherwise let me just remove this here and then do a run once again, and probably I'll show you then. Removed it, maybe running it again, creates a folder, and then the naming convention of the folder is going to be something like screenshots, and within the screenshots it's going to be having the screenshot for the test case that we're running. So if you look closely over here, it says longer component test, which is similar to the describe function defined at line number 5. With that as space and a hyphen login functionality test. So if you come down here, it says login functionality test, and then login button click. The login button click, and that's when it would click a picture of your website, right? It'll take a screenshot. So if you click on it, there you go. Now you can see that it has in the username and password, and that's how it looked. So screenshot is a very important feature in Cypress. So let's say if you have an error, if you wish to get it reported, you can basically take a screenshot of an error and then put that inside, and then that's usually gets saved here in the screenshots folder for you to go back to and look at and correct the behavior. With that, I think we are pretty much done with this tutorial. And thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen, for watching. If you are liking my work, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Also hit the bell icon in case if I post a new video, you would be notified. So thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be seeing you in the next tutorial.